Good day all. This talk will look at how crime works using all four of sociology's theoretical approaches. First of all, in structuralist terms, crime is a social structure. Now, I think we often try to deny that it is. We think of crime as abnormal, as outside the main fabric of society, as a glitch in the system. But in truth, it is none of these. Crime is a normal, everyday part of all modern societies. Like all social structures, it exists to perform a function. And that function, like all functions, is, broadly speaking, to provide a solution to some of life's problems. Everyone must solve life's problems in order to survive. We all have needs that must be met. We need objective things like food and shelter, and we need subjective things like information and even love. Everyone has to work out how to get those things. And modern societies consist of millions of people. Between them, those millions are going to try every possible way that people can think of to solve life's problems. The majority of those solutions will be legal, but some will not. For the criminal, crime is simply a solution to the life problems that they face. Now, the media often likes to portray criminals as deranged, psychopathic monsters. And some are, but only a tiny minority. The media turns the exception into the rule. They focus on the extreme cases because that makes their shows more dramatic and so increases their audience. But in reality, the vast majority of criminals are just ordinary people who have decided to solve their life problems in a way that society disapproves of. For example, all income-generating crimes, from theft to fraud, are just responses to the problem of having no money. Since lack of money is the most common problem in modern society, this is the most common type of crime. Across North America, millions of people live in poverty. Most of them have tried to make money through legitimate channels and failed. Maybe this is due to a problem with them, such as a lack of job skills. Maybe it's due to a social problem, like racial discrimination. Either way, some people end up broke and desperate. Inevitably, some of them turn to illegitimate channels to make money. When they don't know where their next meal is coming from, everyone prioritizes their own needs over society's laws. This is why eliminating or at least significantly reducing poverty would do more to lower crime rates than any other single measure. However, that doesn't seem likely to happen anytime soon. Now, while crime provides some people with solutions, it also brings with it a whole new set of problems. Because, unlike legitimate professions, crime generates a negative social reaction and opposition from the criminal justice system. In other words, crime generates social conflict, sometimes even lethal conflict. However, as the Marxists have pointed out, conflict is also a normal part of modern society. Workers may engage in class conflict. Ethnic minorities may have to fight for their rights. And criminals will come in conflict with the criminal justice system. But this conflict or opposition from the justice system has never eliminated crime and never will eliminate crime, because professional criminals accept it as simply an occupational hazard. And since only a small minority of criminals are ever caught or incarcerated, this risk is considered acceptable as long as crime pays. And despite what the authorities would like you to believe, it does. It wouldn't exist if it didn't pay. Now, crime can be looked at as a social structure in itself, or as the dark side of all social structures. As structuralist Robert Merton pointed out, for every function, there is a dysfunction. Anything that can be used can be misused. Or, to put that another way, the universe must always maintain balance. You can't have up without down, male without female, or good without evil. And so every single social structure has its criminal side. For example, the family is the oldest social structure of them all. And the family, of course, does all kinds of good things. It provides us with love and nurturance and support. But the family can also be the site of abuse, physical, sexual, emotional abuse. Or the state. The state provides us with social order and social programs. But it also provides the opportunity for political crimes like corruption and treason. The military protects society, but sometimes the military engages in war crimes against civilians, ranging from mass rapes to massacres. But in capitalism, as the Marxists argue, the central social structure of modern society is the market. We live in a world that's gone through a process of globalization, which means we live in a world that has been turned into a single global marketplace. And this market has its dark side, the so-called black market. Just as the market is the central structure of legitimate society, so the black market is the central structure of criminal society. The majority of crime in capitalist society is organized around the markets in illegal goods and services, such as drugs, weapons, prostitution, and loan sharking. And since it is organized around the market like capital, it's organized much like conventional capital, and it generates a class structure which parallels that of mainstream capitalism. At the top of this alternative economy, there are the organized crime syndicates, like the mafia. These may be termed the corporations of crime. They contain the largest concentrations of criminal wealth and power in the world. And, just like regular corporations, these days, their operations are international. Just like regular corporations, they exist in an oligopoly, which means that there's a relatively small number of these powerful syndicates who control most of the world market between them. Now, occasionally they quarrel, and where regular corporations would engage in a price war, they engage in a gang war, which of course leaves a lot more people dead. But eventually a new balance of power is arrived at. The bosses agree on how they're going to carve up the territory, and peace returns. The gang lords, then, are the upper class of crime. They're immensely rich, and having gained their money illegally has rarely prevented them from making close connections with rich business persons and powerful politicians. In short, the gang lords are very much a part of the upper class of society as a whole. Indeed, Marxists have argued that ultimately there's a fine line between them and the legitimate corporations, which in practice break the law in multiple ways every single day in the course of their regular business activities. But these corporations of crime employ thousands of petty gangsters. They make up the working class of crime. And like any workers, they're basically paid to do as they're told by their bosses. The problem is that what they're told to do often involves violence, even lethal violence. Now, in between the upper class and the working class is, of course, the middle class. The conventional market-based middle class consists of small, independent businesses, usually family businesses. In the world of crime, this can mean individual criminals or small gangs, which are also very often family-based. Many of these are involved in the market for stolen goods, especially autos and electronics. Others may sell locally produced items like drugs, or they may subcontract from one of the big syndicates, providing local distribution as part of a much larger drug operation. Either way, the class structure of crime shadows that of legitimate society. Also, Marxists blame the class structure of legitimate capitalism for most crime. Poor wages and unemployment force the working class to commit crimes just to survive. And competition on the market forces the business class to commit crimes just to avoid bankruptcy and survive economically. Marxists argue that if private property was abolished and society's wealth was distributed more fairly and equally, then most crime would simply disappear. However, this too does not seem likely to happen anytime soon. Subjectivists have pointed out that crime is not just objective, it's also subjective. Indeed, subjectivists have argued that, ultimately, crime is just a matter of definition. Crime is whatever society says it is. Literally anything can be criminalized if a law is passed making it criminal. Now, in theory, the law formalizes the values and sentiments of society as a whole. But in practice, the law is made by rich and powerful authority figures and may reflect their interests more than those of society as a whole. For example, the criminalization of drug use through the so-called war on drugs was done in a top-down manner with minimal community involvement. It was justified with the claim that these drugs are so dangerous that the state had to criminalize drug users, imprison them, give them a criminal record, and generally do everything in the state's power to ruin their lives, all for their own good. The health risks of psychoactive drugs, especially marijuana, were wildly exaggerated by a state propaganda campaign. And while this campaign was effective in the late 20th century, its falsehoods have become increasingly well known in the 21st century, and so the war on drugs is in decline. A number of countries, including Canada, have decriminalized marijuana and look set to decriminalize other psychoactive drugs. So, in the course of history, drug use has gone from being legal to being illegal and is now moving back towards being legal. The activity of drug use has not changed, but society's definition of it has changed. And most importantly, the law's definition of it has changed. Now, this means that crime does not just consist of objective actions. It also consists of how society defines those actions as legal or as illegal. And there are many social factors that can enter into how society at large makes its definitions. Ultimately, there must be a social consensus in at least some parts of society that a certain action should be legal or illegal. Now, opinion polls have shown that by far the highest level of consensus in society concerns homicide. Society is virtually unanimous that homicide should be a crime. But once you get past homicide, opinion is divided. Women see sexual assault as a more serious crime than men do. The rich see property crime as more serious than the poor do. And, as I just said, public opinion on the war on drugs is changing rapidly. But if public opinion is divided, then whose definitions get made into law? Well, who makes the laws and who has the most influence on the lawmakers? The short answer to that, I would argue, is the rich and powerful. Politicians and big business persons. They decide which actions will be criminalized and which will not. Partly, the laws they pass will reflect community standards, but partly they will also reflect their own self-interest. And this distortion of criminal justice means that the criminal justice system is not automatically in the right, or that criminals are automatically in the wrong. For example, Rosa Parks was a criminal in that she knowingly violated the law. But today that law is seen as unjust, and she is seen as a civil rights heroine. However, crime in the service of a social cause, such as that of Rosa Parks, is rare. Most crime is committed in self-interest. And most commonly, self-interest is defined in terms of making money. But not always. Modern society is based on two things: money and power. Everyone wants money, but many people also want power. And so much crime is about obtaining power, power over other people. At the highest levels of power, politics, is where money and power often interact illegally through bribery and corruption of politicians. The rich can use their money to obtain political power, usually for the purpose of making themselves even richer. However, political power is only for a minority. For most men, illegal power over others can only be obtained through violence. Feminists have drawn society's attention to the millions of women across North America who have been victims of male violence, especially domestic violence and sexual assault. This type of violence exists in all social classes. It cannot be explained by having or not having money. It's a problem that was virtually ignored by society in general until the women's liberation movement arose in the 1960s and forced this issue onto society's agenda. Since then, laws have been toughened up and convictions for this crime have risen. But the recent appearance of the #MeToo movement shows that this is still a problem that exists on a social scale. Like all social relations, gender relations include both cooperation and conflict. While women are also capable of violence, men's greater size and strength makes male violence the more serious problem and the more serious crime. Moreover, studies have shown that when women turn to crime, it is all too often because they have been forced to do so by male violence. As Bernard Chissel put it, most women in North America's prisons are, and I quote, victims first, offenders second. Meaning, these are women who have been physically and/or sexually abused and have been threatened with more abuse if they don't break the law, usually for the man's benefit. This is why, as feminists have argued, women's crimes must be understood differently from men's crimes. Violence can establish a relationship of intimidation and domination, which some men value for itself, for the feeling of power it gives them, whether that's power over their woman or over another man. Similarly, for some men, sexual assault provides both sexual gratification and the gratification of having power over their victim. This lust for sex and lust for power is, of course, much more common in men than in women. Men's greater aggressiveness leads them to commit the majority of all crimes and the overwhelming majority of violent crimes. And in my opinion, this is unlikely to ever change. Psychologist Abraham Maslow once said that, and I quote, "When the only tool you have is a hammer, you tend to see every problem as a nail." Let me put that in even more basic terms. When the only advantage you have over others is your greater physical strength, then you tend to see force and violence as the solution to every problem. As I said at the start of this talk, most criminals see crime simply as a solution to their life problems. These problems can be objective, such as a lack of food and shelter, or these problems may be purely subjective, as with the jealous husband who beats his wife for cheating, which exists only in his own mind. Perhaps someday society will evolve into a perfect utopia in which nobody has any problems. Then, and only then, will we have a society without crime. Their only problem will be that, without problems to solve, everyone might just die of boredom. But until then, crime is and will continue to be a part of every society in the world. And as for utopia, well, like I keep saying, that doesn't seem likely to happen anytime soon. A transcript of this talk is available if you're interested. Good day, all.